What does brain aging actually look like, and why should people care about it sooner than they do today?
People are actually aging at different rates, and you can
Interesting.
influence that rate of age. That's true for your blood vessels, for instance. What is the rate at which you're accumulating cholesterol or plaque in your blood vessels? And the rate at which that's happening is going to determine whether or not you have a heart attack someday, right? So it's the
Sure.
same thing with the brain. So the brain, on a physical structural level, is shrinking as you age. You lose about 1% of your brain volume per year in the
Okay.
hippocampus, which is the Alzheimer's area.
Is that from birth?
That starts in your mid-20s
Okay. Wow.
and it accelerates as you get older. So the rate of that loss gets faster as you get older, but you can start measuring that in people that are 25, which is why it's important to start early because this is a trackable factor that you can see how you're doing with this. And so as the brain shrinks, it's shrinking because of loss of neurons, it's shrinking because of loss of connections between neurons. So the synapses that connect one neuron to another one. And the good news is you can actually grow your brain back. So
Hmm.
that's not inevitable.
Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Haven't talked about this too much on the podcast, but over the course of the last 18 months, maybe 2 years, I've had this fascination with longevity, and not just longevity and how long do we live, but really what is the quality of our life as we go on through life. And maybe this is something that's normal as you get a little bit deeper into your lifetime and you wonder, am I going to go another 20, 30, 40, 50 years? It's crazy how long people are living in some cases, but also how important it is to make sure that that quality of life, or what some people might call their health span, how important it is to make sure we're extending that. I'm an active guy. I love spending time on my paddleboard. I love boogie boarding. I love gravel biking. I ski 20, 25 days a year. Love being super, super active. Want to be able to continue that long into my life. And so that is kind of I think fueling a little bit of this interest with longevity. So many factors that go into this. I mean, what is it that makes up a long, long life and that enables some people, like my grandmother, who lived to be the age of 98, live so much longer than others, like her husband, my grandfather, who passed away at 71? Is it diet? Is it exercise? Is it the way that we look at life and our mental health? Is it the power of our relationships? Is it having a purpose? So many different things that go into what we're going to talk about today, both lifespan and health span. This is why, by the way, when I was reading the Wall Street Journal last summer, I saw this article and it absolutely fascinated me. It was about what we're talking about here, lifespan and health span. It was about particularly how the aging of our brain and the health of our brain plays into that, and what causes things like dementia or perhaps Alzheimer's disease and so on. And it caught my eye. I was reading through the article and I tripped over this just amazing company. The company is called NeuroAge Therapeutics, and they're really bringing science and data and brain health and longevity, all these topics that I'm really interested in, together. So, of course, I reached out to that organization's co-founder and CEO, Dr. Christin Glorioso. She was kind enough to say, I would love to be on the Tech Ed podcast. And Christin, so awesome to have you with us today. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
So let's start with this. I talked a little bit in my intro about my fascination with longevity. It seems like we're reading a lot more about that today than we were maybe 10 years ago. De-aging is another word for it, health optimization. So why do you think this has become such an important conversation, particularly as it relates to the health of our brain?
Yeah, so I've been in the field for 20 years. I'm a physician and neuroscientist, but I've been studying normal brain aging since the early 2000s when I started graduate school. And at that time, there was a small group of maybe a few hundred scientists that were working on life and health span extension. And just in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, we've seen an explosion of interest from the public, which has been really great. I think that's been fueled by some wealthier folks like Jeff Bezos starting
Hmm.
Altos Labs and Google starting a anti-aging moonshot in Calico in San Francisco. And so there's been incoming interest from wealthier individuals and corporations. And then we've even had influencers like Brian Johnson come in and start popularizing the field. And there's, the good and the bad with all of that. But I think overall, it's very positive.
I even saw a quote not too long ago. I think it was an interview with Elon Musk where he said, "Look, aging is a process. We can fix any process. We're going to solve for aging." Wouldn't be the first time that he maybe came up with something that was a little bit far fetched, and who knows where we're going to end up there. But so many people and so many people with significant influence having these conversations. So the first thing I'm hearing is that the fact that it feels to me like we're having a lot more conversations about aging and de-aging and health span and lifespan. These are things that it's not just me. It's the greater culture that's having these conversations. What interests me in this Wall Street Journal article wasn't just the work you're doing, which we're going to go deep on, but also why this is particularly fascinating to you. So talk a little bit about why this whole idea of research and particularly research on brain health is so important to you individually and personally.
Yeah, so a lot of what I've done in my career is around my own family history of Alzheimer's. So when I was a kid, my grandmother suffered with Alzheimer's. My grandfather took care of her in the home. That had a really big impact on the whole family. And then unfortunately, it was in the next generation, and her daughter, my aunt, recently passed away from Alzheimer's in her 70s. And thank you. And I myself have a genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's. I have an ApoE4 allele. Um, it puts me at 2 to 3 times the risk as the general population. It's very common. Almost 25% of people have this genetic risk factor. People with two copies are 12 times as at risk. So more and more
Wow.
people are finding that out from companies like 23andMe or whole genome sequencing, which more and more people are having. And so once you start knowing that you have a genetic risk factor and there's something you can do about it, which is the other piece of it, then that's really incentivizing to try and figure out what we can do to prevent Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is about 40% lifestyle based, 60% genetic. So that 40% is this huge piece that you can actually impact. And there was a study in the Lancet that showed that up to 65% of Alzheimer's cases can be prevented with a bunch of
Wow.
lifestyle interventions.
So 65% of these cases can be prevented, and that I mean, I think that is certainly news to a lot of people. In fact, I remember in the days when we had relatives that were maybe and Alzheimer's wasn't understood the way that it is today, that it was just a normal part of the aging process. Or as people got older, they maybe became more forgetful. There's certainly other impacts and other causes beyond Alzheimer's for that. But what I'm hearing from you is that almost 2/3 of the factors that may lead to certain types of dementia can be prevented, and they're more around lifestyle. I think when people think about aging or decline, and historically it's about things like wrinkles or the physical decline, whether your knees don't work as well or you can't get around as well as you used to. A little bit less on the whole brain aging side. So let's talk about that. What does brain aging actually look like, and then why should people care about it sooner than they do today?
Yeah, so we're all aging at a particular rate. So if you look at someone and you can guess maybe within 5 to 10 years how old they are accurately, that difference between how old they are and how old you guess they were might actually be real. So this is what we know from the animal studies, that people are actually aging at different rates, and you can
Interesting.
influence that rate of age. So that's true for your blood vessels, for instance. What is the rate at which you're accumulating cholesterol or plaque in your blood vessels? And the rate at which that's happening is going to determine whether or not you have a heart attack someday, right? So it's the
Sure.
same thing with the brain. So the brain, on a physical structural level, is shrinking as you age. So you lose about 1% of your brain volume per year in the
Okay.
hippocampus, which is the Alzheimer's area, and that's a
Starting when?
direct
Is that from birth, or is that when does that start?
that starts in your mid-20s,
Okay. Wow. Okay.
and it accelerates as you get older. So the rate of that loss gets faster as you get older, but you can start measuring that in people that are 25, which is why it's important to start early, because this is a trackable factor that you can see how you're doing with this. And so as the brain shrinks, it's shrinking because of loss of neurons, it's shrinking because of loss of connections between neurons. So the synapses that connect one neuron to another one. And the good news is you can actually grow your brain back. So
Hmm.
that's not inevitable.
Wow.
there have been randomized control studies that show with just 25 extra minutes of exercise a week. So, one of the best ways to grow back the Alzheimer's brain region is with high intensity interval training, which isn't people's favorite thing to do to get your
Right?
heart rate up really high. It's intense cardio and bursts. But if you do that, you can actually increase the volume of your hippocampus. And I myself did that. So my hippocampus has gotten more than 1% bigger in the last year when it was
Wow.
supposed to shrink. So,
Yeah, so
yeah.
really 2% bigger than it would have been, right? Because rather than shrinking 1%, it got 1% bigger. That is absolutely fascinating. So that begs a whole bunch of questions. I mean, first of all, I'm a fitness guy, former bike racer. I mean, I know all about HIIT workouts and about, pushing my body to the extreme. For me, it's like twice a week I try to do kind of that zone 5 workout, right? Where I push my heart rate several times over the course of a half an hour to an hour to kind of its limit, where you literally feel like, all right, if I push myself any harder, I'd fall off the bike, or I'd run off the end of the treadmill or whatever. Is that what you're talking about? So is part of it just doing those really, really high intensity workouts? Talk about that a little bit more, and then I have another question for you.
Yeah, so, those high intensity interval workouts, the ones that have been studied the most are Norwegian 4x4, so that is but you can do it on a bike, you can do it in other ways, but the one that's been studied is 4 minutes at 70-80% max heart rate, and then 4 minutes of walking or resting, and then you do that 4 times. So these, like, you know, depending on how fast you're running, it's about a half a mile of going really hard. So
Mm-hmm.
I did track in high school, and that's at 800, which is I think the worst race, 2 laps around the track.
Right.
So it's brutal. But, if you do that for 6 months and you train for 6 months, you can increase your VO2 max, which is your body's engine, how efficiently you utilize oxygen. And
Right.
for every point you go up in VO2 max, you decrease your dementia risk in the future significantly. And so if you train for 6 months with Norwegian 4x4, the effects last for up to 5 years. So they've shown that dementia prevention can be 5 years later. So you just do it for 6 months and you're good for 5 years, and maybe you have
Wow.
to do another bout of training. Yes.
So talk about this, and for anybody that's done high intensity training, and so the 4 on 4 off, or pushing yourself to the limit for 4 minutes, which is, I mean, it's excruciating. Feels great when you're done, right? When you get to that 4 minutes of recovery, that's awesome, and then you hit it again. You do that 4 times. But talk about what the connection between that and the VO2 max, and then the increase in this, you said, is the size of your hippocampus, right? Is that, talk about why those would be connected.
Yeah, so when you exercise, particularly when you sprint or get your heart rate up high, your body releases BDNF in your brain. And BDNF is brain derived neurotrophic factor. It's like plant food for your neurons. So it's released in a pulsatile fashion. So and it's related to how much exercise you're doing. There's other things that release BDNF. Actually, weightlifting can do it as well.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting.
but when that happens, your neurons actually sprout and they can become. If you think of them like a tree, they have more branches and more leaves. So that's the connection with exercise. So it's really good for your brain.
Awesome. So exercise is good for so many things, and certainly your brain part of that as well. And so that part is fascinating. How do you measure that increase in brain size? How's that done?
Yeah, so we do it through structural MRI. You go in, it's a non-contrast, non-radiation, it's just a magnet. So it's safe to repeat yearly. And it just measures the volume in a picture of your brain.
Huh.
And then
Okay.
we look
So
at
it's
a
as
bunch
simple
of
as that.
calculations. Yeah, yeah. And that's a direct approximation of how many neurons you have. So it's really that neuron loss that's the problem in dementia, is that you start to lose neurons in different parts of the brain.
Got it. So you're doing this work. You're doing your 6 months of really hard intensity work. You're increasing the size of your brain. I mean, it may be a weird question, but like, do you notice a difference as you go through life when you're doing that, or is that more just something you would see on an MRI?
I mean, I certainly feel more energetic, happier,
Mm-hmm.
sharper subjectively. Part of our testing also is cognitive testing. So we have 5 games online so you can actually test whether what you're doing in your lifestyle is working for your cognition. So those games are reaction times. Your reaction time slows even starting in your 20s. Number spans, the number of numbers you can remember in a row. So most people can remember 7 numbers. That's the length of a phone number.
Phone
But
number?
by the
Yeah.
time you get to be in your 80s, you can only remember 4 numbers on average. And then we also have a game called word pairs, which are 12 pairs of words. When you see the first word and you have to remember the second one, it's a pretty hard game. And then names and faces, which is the one that I was most curious about. So,
Sure.
because I don't know about you, but I feel like I meet a lot of people, I start to forget people's names and faces and how much of that is normal for your age or
Sure.
not, right? And so you can look at all of those, and if you exercise more and train your VO2 max, it should actually move across these different modalities and make your reaction time faster and make your memory
Huh.
better.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. So all these years of playing Simon when I was a kid, right, where he had to remember the colors and the sounds in order, what have you. That's kind of the same kind of thing is what I'm hearing. That's
Well, that's actually interesting because, there was a big lawsuit with a company that has brain training games of 10 or 15 years ago for making claims that weren't substantiated. And it turns out that the memory games actually do not move across modality. So if you train your memory, it's just going to make you better at the memory game. But if you exercise, it's going to make you better at all of them physically.
wow. Okay.
And if you train your reaction time, that one actually speed training is the only one of those cognitive games that actually will help you get better in other areas. It'll make your memory better to train your
Huh,
reaction.
interesting. So talk about that part of it. So the reaction time, how do it sounds like there's a game to test that, but what does that experience feel like if you're going through it?
Yeah, so you can train your reaction time in a lot of different ways. Basically, anything fast moving. So, pickleball, ping pong, video games, anything that requires you to move quickly to do something, right? Use your brain. So there's a lot of options for people. The game that has randomized control evidence behind it is a game called Double Decision. There's a object in the middle and then an object in the periphery of the screen, and it gets
Okay.
faster, and you have to identify the object and identify the quadrant of where that object was. And that
Okay.
increases your field of view and makes your brain faster. And as your brain gets faster, it's wiring not only the parts of your brain required for speed, but also required for memory. So you're making your neurons have more fast wiring in multiple areas.
Huh. And so I know our audience is going to be listening to this and saying, okay, how do I get access to that? What's the answer to that question?
So we will have a version of that game up on the website in the next couple weeks.
Okay.
So people
Awesome.
can get it through NeuroAge. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we'll link that up in the show notes. So we'll make sure that folks have access to that. That's absolutely fascinating to me. I will be all over that particular game if there's that much of a connection. Then this is something that I'm definitely interested in doing. So let's kind of get back into the. I went down a rabbit hole, which happens from time to time here on the podcast, but those were really really fascinating things for me. You're one of your big arguments, Christin, is that we need to stop treating dementia as just a single condition. Talk about that philosophy. Why is it not a single condition, and why are we in some ways holding progress back by thinking about it that way?
Yeah. So dementia is actually an umbrella term. There's more than a dozen different types of dementia. So there's Alzheimer's
Okay.
dementia, Parkinson's dementia, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia. And what they have in common is that you're losing neurons, but where those neurons are lost are in different parts of the brain. And cause for what's causing those neurons to be lost is different. So vascular dementia is cardiovascular problem in your brain. It's the same reason your blood vessels get clogged in your heart. They also get clogged in your brain. That causes oxygen to be deprived in little areas, have little mini strokes. That's vascular dementia. It's different than Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is shrinking of the hippocampus, and that's due to a number of different factors. And so historically, people have thought that's entirely due to the toxic buildup of a protein called amyloid. We now have a blood test for that protein. Um, but there's additional factors that contribute. So there are some people that have lots of amyloid and never develop Alzheimer's. So we can see that on PET scan, we can see it on their blood test. Their memory is totally fine. So if amyloid was the only thing that's causing Alzheimer's, you would not expect anyone who has a lot of amyloid to be cognitively normal. So
Sure.
it's multifactorial. So just like in heart disease, you know, having high blood pressure, for instance, is one risk factor amongst
Mm-hmm.
many. Also high
Right.
cholesterol, also glucose levels. So all of these other things, whether or not you smoke, contribute. So amyloid is one risk factor. I think of it like high cholesterol, plaque building up in your heart. There's plaque building up in your brain, but from a different cause. But all of the pharmaceutical companies for the last 30 years have been almost exclusively focused on trying to remove amyloid, thinking that would cure the disease. We've had a couple of drug approvals for that. They work moderately well. They help people a little bit. They work better earlier on in the course of disease. So that's another reason to get an early diagnosis and start tracking earlier, because these are only going
Hmm.
to work for you if you catch it early. But they definitely don't work for everyone. And so we know that there are other things going on that contribute to Alzheimer's. So what's known as the hallmarks of brain aging. So there's mitochondrial dysfunction, there's synapse loss, there's damage to your DNA, there's inflammation in your glial cells, which are the support cells, the immune cells in the brain. And so all of those also contribute. And so at NeuroAge, we're also tracking those things as well. And we need new drugs that target those in addition to the amyloid drugs.
So talk a little bit about your work at NeuroAge and maybe just give our audience an understanding or an overview of what the company is, what it does, how the business model works. Those kind of things would be, I think, interesting for us to understand.
Yeah, so we think of ourselves a lot like Tesla. So Tesla is not a car company. They're an AI company, right? And right, Elon will tell you that, that really they're gathering data for better self-driving to be able to use that data in a way that's gonna further technology. We're the same way. So we have a test that can tell you how old your brain is. It
Okay.
combines brain MRI with cognitive testing with blood biomarkers. These are tracking the hallmarks of brain aging. We put that together using AI, and we can give you a brain aging score. The goal is to be 5 years younger. That's the magic number to
Yep.
prevent Alzheimer's in the future. And
Awesome.
we give you personalized recommendations to slow down or reverse your brain aging. So that's the entry level. But at the same time, in a privacy protected way, we're gathering the data that we need for personalized Alzheimer's therapeutics. So some of the things that we're testing for in the blood or genetically are also drug targets. So we know which drugs are going to work for you, what type of Alzheimer's you have, and what the best strategy might be to treat it. And so in the background, we're running experiments in cell culture and gearing up for clinical trials and that kind of thing, partnering with pharma
Interesting.
companies.
You've got individuals that are doing this testing to understand their, current and future health of their brain, and then you've got pharmaceutical companies as well that are using in a generalized manner and in a respecting confidentiality and HIPAA and so on, using that data to understand how they may target some of the causes of dementia and then have early intervention. Am I getting that right? Is that kind of the business model without going into too much detail?
Exactly. So we have a consumer-facing product. We also sell through more than 30 private payer healthcare clinics with doctors.
Okay.
So you can buy
Yep.
the neuro test now, and we'll give you those personalized recommendations, let you know how you're doing, help you slow
Sure.
down or reverse your brain aging. That for the 65% of people that Alzheimer's can be prevented, will help you achieve what we have with what's known now. And then that data in a totally anonymized, totally privacy protected way is being used to say, okay, this person is on a trajectory that maybe this mitochondrial drug will help, whereas this other person maybe needs an amyloid drug because their Alzheimer's is being driven by that instead. And so we are working on those drugs in its early days, but we're starting to work on those drugs. And
Yeah.
we're also partnering with larger pharma companies that want to
Cool.
work on the drugs as well.
Got it. So is anybody and everybody a candidate for this? Should everybody be doing this kind of testing? Are there certain risk factors or certain individuals that should be paying more attention to this than others?
I think everybody should be doing this testing just like everybody starts getting their yearly checkup for their glucose and their cholesterol, right? Starting in your late 20s, you need to gather all this information. But there are people that are more at risk and that are probably are more interested. So about 25% of the population has an ApoE4 allele, this genetic risk factor. for Alzheimer's, but about half our customers do. So there's definitely people that know they have a genetic risk factor are more likely to want to take the test. Also, people that have a family history. So maybe they took care of a parent or a grandparent and they see it on both sides of their family, maybe, and are really wanting a solution. And then people that are just biohackers. We have tons of people that just want to optimize everything. They want to have the sharpest brain they can possibly have now. It's important
Right.
for their job. And so,
Got it.
sort of a nice side effect of preventing dementia is it makes you really sharp right now.
Okay, awesome. And so you mentioned 65% of I forget if it was Alzheimer's or dementia in general is avoidable or preventable. What are some of those, decisions we can make along the course of our life that might be influencing for better or for worse whether or not we're at risk?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different pillars. So the 9 pillars of healthy brain aging. And we think of brain aging as a marathon, not a sprint. You're looking at these little tiny changes. You're trying to, prevent 1% shrinkage. So it's helpful to have a multi-decade plan and, be working on that as early as possible. And so those 9 pillars are in general diet. So we recommend Mediterranean diet with an emphasis on fruit and veggies, low amount of red meat, coffee and tea for the polyphenols, berries. Exercise, so 5 to 6 times a week for an hour with a variety of exercises. No one type of exercise is better than another, but in combination, they work different parts of your brain. Sleep, that's a huge one. So 7 to 8 hours. Community is often overlooked. So spending at least an hour a day with friends or family or loved ones in a relaxing way. General health. So there's a huge heart brain connection, gut brain connection. So making sure your glucose is under control, your cholesterol is under control, your blood pressure is perfectly optimized, not just so you're not in trouble, but your blood pressure should be optimal, right? 120/80, not 140
Hmm.
over 90. And mental health. So stress is a big one. And related to that, working on stress daily. So meditation, journaling, time management, managing toxic relationships if you have them. So that's a really big one. And then environmental toxins. That's microplastics, pesticides, filter your water, get rid of the plastic Tupperware. Um,
Yep.
so if we're, I actually track all these things daily, so that's kind of like the baseline of how to do that. And if people do all of that well, their brain aging is going to be under control. So we have a 4-minute lifestyle quiz. You can see how you're doing in all those areas, and people that score better on that quiz tend to have younger brains.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting as I mentioned in the intro, some of the I can't call it research, but just the reading that I've done on this whole idea of longevity. It's amazing how many of the recommendations, for lack of a better term, come back to those 9 things that you just talked about, and so it's really it's not just your research, but it's and not just on brain health, but just in general how we can do these 9 things in this case, and they're all decisions, right? I mean, we can make conscious decisions about every single one of those things that you mentioned. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you don't have to be perfect on any of them, right? You just
Right,
have to be, good enough and on
right.
average over the course of decades doing okay. And so, I don't want people to think they have to be so extreme, like never eat
Right.
past 11 p.m. or
Right,
whatever.
exactly. I do my exercise, then I have my coffee, then I meditate, then I write. We call it directionally connect correct in our businesses. You gotta get close enough. I want to come back to this idea about the use of artificial intelligence as well. And without telling us anything you can't, would be curious about like how big is this population of people that you're able to gain these insights based upon the test and based upon the data that you're pulling, and then anything you can share on what types of AI, and I mean, I know you're not just pulling all this up and dumping it into a GPT and saying, "Hey, tell me what this tells me." You've got to be doing things with, supervised and unsupervised and reinforcement learning and so on. So would just be curious on both of those. How big is the population, and then any specifics you can give us on how you're leveraging artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so our data is trained on hundreds of thousands of people, and we're continuously learning from the new people that join NeuroAge. And yes, it's the large language models are part of it, but it's also a lot of machine learning algorithms, good old fashioned
Hmm.
machine learning that contributes to this, as well as causal AI, so Mendelian randomization, which is using genetics to have causal inferences about what's not just associated with people's
Hmm.
brains. Being younger, but actually causally driving that. And we can figure that out by the combination of using AI and genetics.
And at NeuroAge Therapeutics, is that you that's doing that work? Do you have a team of data scientists and AI scientists, or who's actually, gathering all that data and then running the algorithms to kind of, determine these inferences and make conclusions or draw conclusions?
Yeah, so the core technology is based on my own work. So I was
Okay.
a postdoc at MIT, co-mentored in the computer science and artificial intelligence department. But now we have a whole team of people that are working on that.
Got it. Fascinating. So, you used a term not too long ago, biohacking, right? And it's interesting. Feels like there's a lot of hype around this as well. I mean, and some of those things are probably valuable. Others are probably less than clinical. Who knows? But can you separate that a little bit? I mean, how does somebody who, for instance, is seeing all of these different, different commercials for all these products, how do they discern what's hype versus what's really science and what they should be doing and focusing on?
Yeah, so it's a big issue, and honestly, a lot of NeuroAge customers are high-powered executives, and instead of us worrying about how to motivate them to do stuff, we actually have to kind of rein them back in because they're doing too many stuff. They're too motivated, and part of that I think is the biohacking, which I do think is great. Most of the time, it's not that there's bad actors or people trying to mislead people or anything like that. But most of the time, it's just that the evidence is preliminary. And
Sure.
people don't understand that in mice, especially for the brain, 99% of drugs fail that look just fine in a mouse model. So if you're taking something that only has mouse evidence, there's a 99% chance that that is going to fail in a clinical trial later on, that that's not effective, maybe not safe.
Huh.
20 or
Interesting.
30% of trials fail for safety and they seem perfectly safe in mice. So that's where I would start is what is the level of evidence? Is there human
Hmm.
evidence? Is it randomized control trials? Is it the most rigorous type of control trials? And if there's not human evidence, do we know that this is at least safe because people have been taking it for a long time? So, like lion's mane mushrooms, for instance, we recommend those. They don't have a lot of good human clinical trials, but we know that people have been eating lion's mane mushrooms for thousands of years. We know
Sure.
they're safe. So that's where I would start. And I write a lot of Substacks to try to help people parse through this because we get questions about this stuff all the time.
Awesome. We'll link your Substack up for those that dive into Substack, which I do regularly. By the way, love Substack. Definitely make sure that our listeners can find that as well. So now let's talk about. We talked about the 65% of things that are like decisions that we can make, and a lot of those are lifestyle decisions, exercise, diet, and so on. In as much as the name of your company is NeuroAge Therapeutics, that therapeutics part of it isn't an accident, right? So talk a little bit about that. So somebody is either at risk, has the risk factors, has been diagnosed, what have you. Talk about the work you're doing in terms of prevention and treatment.
Yeah, so for people that already have mild cognitive impairment, which is just like it sounds, have some mild problems that don't qualify as Alzheimer's, but may turn into Alzheimer's down the road. There's really a lot you can do. So the same things that you do to prevent Alzheimer's actually work to slow down or even improve people's memory with mild cognitive impairment. So we suggest that people do all of those lifestyle interventions. We also personalize our recommendations. So different types of exercises or interventions work for different parts of the brain and for people with different genetics. So we can really tailor those recommendations to people. So I would say that. And then I would say there's a lot of good clinical trials going on. So one clinical trial area that I'm really excited about is TMS, transmagnetic cranial stimulation. It's stimulating the brain through a helmet. It's really safe. It's already been FDA approved for major depression and anxiety and other things. So we know it's been through clinical trials for other purposes, and it's now showing promise in dementia clinical trials. So people want to sign up for that. I would really recommend that. And so there's a bunch of things that people can start doing, but that lifestyle piece is really big.
Huh, that's fascinating. So go deeper on the whole, that's just electromagnetic stimulation of different parts of the brain? Is that what's going on there with the helmet?
Exactly. Yeah, it's non-invasive. You put on the helmet, and it has frequencies that it runs through your brain that encourage the brain to grow or create new connections.
How does somebody access that? I mean, is that just something you can buy on Amazon, or do you need to do that with with a provider, or how does that work?
That is with a provider, and
Okay.
for dementia, it would be a clinical trial. So there are ongoing
Okay.
clinical trials.
Got
I
it.
linked to those in
Very,
my
very cool.
Substack. So I wrote a Substack on TMS so you can see who's doing those clinical trials in that.
We'll check that out. Very, very cool. Let's keep going down this whole idea of therapeutics. You mentioned lion's mane. I mean, are there other which by the way is, I mean, that's some fascinating stuff right there. Go a little bit deeper on what that is, and then in anything else you would recommend.
Yeah, so there's top supplements that we recommend. So we're not selling them, but we do recommend some of them. The first thing I would do is get a really complete blood work panel, like a Function Health or a Superpower, and look to see all of your vitamin levels. And I would combine that with genetics because there's some genetic factors that alter how much vitamins you need for this thing or that thing. So if you're deficient in anything, I would have optimal levels of those vitamins. Overdoing it is also bad. So overdoing vitamin B or vitamin D, which are really important for the brain, is just as toxic as having too little of them. So I would say
Interesting.
tailor it to be the exact right amount. And then the other one that's really important, there's a lot of good evidence for, is omega-3. That's one that we recommend that you track your omega-3 levels, that you can get that blood testing as well, and eat at least 3 servings of fatty fish per week. Or if you're vegetarian, you can do it with algae or walnuts or flaxseed.
Interesting.
And if you can't get to, and that's even more important for people with ApoE4 alleles, with the genetic risk factor I have, you need even more in clinical
Sure.
trials. And if you can't do it that way, then supplementing is another option for omega-3.
Is there like a prescription for improvement, we would call it in our world, of is that what comes back to them after they take the test, or who determines what the best course of action is for an individual?
Yeah, we give people a set of about a dozen recommendations if they complete all the testing. And those are based on their genetics, they're based on which parts of the brain is shrinking, they're based on what we see in the cognitive testing, and it'll be a recommendations, both for lifestyle, things like what types of exercise and how long, and, or other interventions like music training is good for certain parts of the brain.
Yeah, cool.
And then also the supplements. So we'll recommend which set of supplements we think would be right for them. And then come back, get tested, show that you've improved. So it's sort of an ongoing dialogue.
So what is
Yeah.
what is the test? People are probably hearing this and saying this is awesome, but I don't have $30,000 to invest in something like this. What is the cost to an individual to actually do the test?
Yeah, so our starter package is called the Essential Bundle, and it includes a brain MRI and the cognitive testing and the recommendations. And we can analyze your genetics if you've already had it done. That's $13.98. And we send people for MRIs locally. If you just want to start with just the cognitive testing, that's $9.99 a month. You can cancel anytime. So you can just kind of get your baseline. You want to dip your pinky toe in the water
There
and
you
see
go.
how things are going.
Got it. And we'll link that information up in the show notes as well. So are there thought leaders in this space specific to brain health, and then maybe broader in terms of longevity, that you would recommend people follow? Who are some of your favorite authors or thought leaders in this space?
There's a podcaster named Kayla Barnes Lentz. She has a really great in-depth biohacking podcast, so I would recommend her. And for women in particular, I recommend Amy Killen's Substack. She's a longevity physician. Um, and Joe Raphael is a longevity physician we're partnered with. He has a really good Substack as well. And then I do read Eric Topol. He's a little conservative, but I really appreciate his comments.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're huge believers of getting information from a broad spectrum of sources. So, one end of the spectrum or the other. And I think we get away from that a little bit in our world today, where people are so driven to extremes that they're not listening to anybody that might have a contrarian point of view. So I appreciate those recommendations. Let's dream a little bit about the future, if we can, Kristen. First of all, I think our audience is probably fascinated by what we've talked about already in terms of where some of the science is. They probably don't realize that maybe this testing is available, that we've advanced to the point where we can, not just test for some of these risk factors or genetics and so on, but also, treat them today, both with lifestyle and with other solutions. But if we're kind of turning the clock forward, let's say 5 or 10 years, where is all this going? What do you think? What do you think healthcare, particularly to brain aging and brain health, looks like 10 years from now?
Yeah, so I think what's happening with wearables and in-home tracking is just going to continue. So I think we're going to see both in-home real-time monitoring of your mood, of your brain fog, of how you're doing on a particular day. So I think we're going to see wearable devices come out that can do that, either through EEG or some other modality that's like a headband or something you can wear on your wrist. And then I think we're also going to have at home, the same way we have continuous glucose monitors for glucose.
Yep.
I think we're going to see
Sure.
that category expand. So some of the things that we test for annually are going to be able to be tested for daily or continuously. So you can see what you're doing in real time, how it's impacting your brain aging on a micro scale, or your brain fog, or how good you're feeling. I'm really interested in mental health as well, so which
Sure.
definitely feeds into it. So I think we're going to see depression monitoring, anxiety monitoring. I think this is going to be wonderful because people will get all this feedback and they can optimize their own brain on a daily basis.
I can't help but draw a parallel to what we talk about here on the podcast all the time, which is the edge to cloud continuum. And people have heard me say over and over and over again, in the same way that, my phone can track everything I do and perfectly predict the next song that I want to hear on Spotify, or maybe the next podcast that I want to hear on Spotify. And we talk about the edge to cloud sensors on the edge, and then cloud computing and everything that happens in between. And we say that's happening in every single sector of our economy, healthcare being no exception. And so, perfect parallel what you just said to that edge to cloud continuum, that we're going to more and more opportunities to measure activity, not just through our phones, but through other means, being able to gather that data and juxtapose that against a large language model of, hundreds of thousands or millions of other people, and kind of look at the results that whatever it is, their lifestyle changes, their treatments and so on have had, and what's the best possibility for me, just pulling all of that data. I think the future of healthcare is super, super exciting. So did I get that right? Is that kind of where you think this is all going?
Absolutely. We're going to be able to say, Matt, for people like you that have similar genetics, similar biomarker profiles, similar MRI scans, this is what's worked for them to lower their brain age. It's this supplement, it's this regimen, it's this protocol. And why don't you try implementing that? And then you can monitor it in real time and see that it's having the impact that we expect it to have. And those are the kind of tools that we really need.
Yeah, for anybody that's navigated healthcare, and it can be challenging sometimes, a lot of times in this country, I think the future is really, really bright as we move into more of these data-driven decisions, and understanding what works and what doesn't. I'm super, super excited for it. So it feels like you and I share this level of optimism. Fair to say? Do you kind of see it the same way?
Absolutely. I am so excited about what's going on. I think we're at just the beginning of this tidal wave of solutions for brain health and for dementia prevention. So, I wake up every day so excited to be in this field.
Well, and that's easy. If you have a job you love, you never have to work, and it sounds like you certainly do. All kinds of, you talked about your experience at MIT. You talked about certainly some of the work you've done over the course of the last 20-25 years. Really, really fascinating. I want to wrap up here, Kristen, with two questions. They're questions that we ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast. The first one has to deal with that education pathway. We all have our own. Everybody has whatever they chose to do, whether it was K-12 education, going on to something thereafter, going to the workforce. We all have our own journey through education. You have yours. What is one thing that you think about education in general that might surprise our audience?
So I was an MD PhD. The tagline for that is bench to bedside translational research. I ended up not practicing, instead going to MIT and then starting a company. because I
Hmm.
actually think that whole program is too inefficient. I think we're going to see
Interesting.
education shrinking in timelines, and we're going to see coming in and out of education as you need it. And people sort of starting companies, then go learn something, come back, start a different company. And, AI is enabling all of this with vibe coding and everything else. So I think the education model is going to totally change. And that's going to be a good thing.
That's the reason, raison d'etre, I should say, for the Tech Ed podcast, right? The education model is totally going to change. We're super excited about that. I spend so much of my time just kind of thinking about what education is going to look like in the future, and there's so many opportunities for us to compress learning, to use artificial intelligence and other technologies to really expedite the ability for us to, going back to brain health, being able to pack our brains with all kinds of information, lifelong learning, on ramps, off ramps. We're way, way away from the days when you can have your high school diploma and then never have to worry about any formal education thereafter. We're constantly learning. That becomes even more important as all this is moving so fast. So you and I are in complete alignment on that topic. The last question before we close up shop here on the Tech Ed podcast for Dr. Christin Glorioso is this one. If you could go back in time, you go back to being a sophomore in high school, 15-year-old, give or take. Again, another question we love asking every single one of our guests here on the podcast, Christin. If you could go back to that period of time in your life and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Go directly for what you want. That's what I would say. If there's an end goal, try it out. Just start down that path sooner.
Love it. Yeah, we don't have to make this more complicated than we need to, right? If you know where you want to end up, if you know what that career is, if you know what that lifestyle is, if you know what you want your life to look like, get after that sooner. We don't have to go down this prescribed route of where we start and where we end up. It's a journey, but we can expedite that journey and live a really super exciting life like the one that you're living. I mean, you talked to us about waking up every day and being excited about the incredible work you're doing at NeuroAge Therapeutics. Super excited about the conversation we had around that work. It was absolutely fascinating time with you, Christin. Can't thank you enough for being with us.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was really fun.
Fun for both of us and fun for our audience, I'm sure. Thanks so much to our audience for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. We're linking a bunch of stuff up in the show notes, how you get a hold of Christin, how you access her Substack, how you get in touch with NeuroAge Therapeutics and the great work that they're doing. So be sure and check out those show notes. We have the best show notes in the business, and you will find those at techedpodcast.com/glorioso, techedpodcast.com/GLORIOSO. That's where we'll put the show notes when you're done there. Check us out on social media. You find us everywhere. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. Anywhere you go to find your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. Be sure and reach out, say hello. We would love to hear from you. Can't wait to see everybody again next week on the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, I am your host, Matt Kirkner. Thank you for being with us.